Okay, welcome back. This is Eric here again, and we're going to take a look here at part 2 of events in Substrate. And in this part, we're going to look more at generic events instead of simple events, and we're also going to look at how to set this up in the runtime so we're not getting any errors ourselves. So we started here as a simple event, and we have another palette here already set up called generic event. So these are in order, G for generic. Open up that source, and we're going to open up the library. Now I've got a little bit of extra code here that you don't have because I just didn't want to type it out again while we're recording this because it will just sort of suck up your time. So this is a demonstration of event variants that use types from the palette's configuration trait. And if you're not sure what that means, that's okay. We're going to go over it. But here we're using exactly the same use statements at the top as we were for the simple events. Nothing's changed here. And the same when it comes to configuring the traits here. So everything's just the same. Basically, it's a copy and paste for you. And why don't we go down to where we declare the... Why don't we go down to where we declare this first, and I'll just remove this. Okay, so now when it comes to dealing with generics, we need to use this of type T statement. So T here within these little angly brackets stands for type, because we're telling it that we're going to pass some generic type, some unknown type into our event that we want to go out when it's emitted. And the most common one that I've seen, and there's a bunch of different ones, is the account ID, okay? So again, if you don't understand what it's saying here, it's more about memorizing the syntax because it's going to remain the same every single time. So we're going to give it a name, and we're going to use account ID here. And account ID equals type as, and where are we getting this type from? We're getting it from the framework system. It's config account ID. Okay, we're just getting the account ID, and we're saving it in this variable, and we want to pass it to our event. And so just like last time, we could say, this is my second event, and we could pass it, we could make a second one here, and maybe it just has the account ID, maybe it doesn't have anything else, or maybe it has a U32 and whatever else you want. You could pass like a whole bunch of values here. Okay, so for now, I'm just going to knock this off. And I'm going to paste my commented one. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, so let's look now how we send out this generic. So everything's set up the same. We've declared our module, which is where we send out our functions or write our functions. And we're going to get our origin here. We're going to basically initialize our events here so we can send it out. And here, again, the name has changed, but otherwise all the organization of this is exactly the same as the simple ones, right? We're going to take in an origin and some kind of input value, which is going to be a U32, and then we're going to return our results. So again, we're going to check the origin and ensure that it's signed and save the value as user. And if you remember last time, we did not save the user variable last time. So if we go to look at simple events, I guess I should zoom in on that one as well. Sorry about that. We saved it here called as caller, and we didn't actually use it. So this time we're actually going to use it. So, okay, I just increased my font size here a bit, so hopefully it's a little bit easier to read. Okay, so again, we could do something with this input value. We're not going to because we don't really need to. And this variable type here is the account ID. So if we actually hold our mouse over it, it will show us variable user is type as config, a whole bunch of little dotties there, and account ID. So we know that it's the account ID. Now, again, we're going to call it just like before. We're going to say self. Our little dotties, we're going to say deposit event. And now this is where it's different. Okay, the last one, this is a raw event. Last time, we just used event, and we can only use event for primitive types. Okay, if we're going to pass a generic, it needs to be a raw event. Then our dots, Then we're going to, the name of the event we're going to use, which is emit input, and then we're going to pass it the value. So this is the user, which is the account ID, and then our new number. And then we're going to say OK. So I'm not going to run this right now. You're just going to have to trust me that it works. Now, in a lot of cases, we might want to mix using a generic event and a non-generic event, meaning just a simple event in the same palette. And I wanted to take a look at how we do that, because if we say, okay, this is how we declare a generic event, do we need to make a whole nother declare events section for non-generics? And how do we do this? So what I did is I actually just copied the function above. It's the same function, but I just give it a name called simple event so we know what it is. And I get the user, and let's add a little underscore here because we're not going to use it this time, and we're going to just tell the compiler, okay, we're not using this. And just like before on simple event, we're going to do the exact same thing, just pass out the input value. Now, because we're mixing this with a generic event, we do need to make one difference. Okay, when we call self and we want to deposit the event, we need to call raw event this time. If I pass just event, the compiler is going to throw an error and say, you know, something like, are you sure this is not a generic, right? So we do need to use the raw event, even though we're using we're just passing a simple event. And that's because this is declared together here down at the bottom. So it doesn't know from the statement alone, you know, what's going to happen. So we can just uncomment this. That's why I commented this. And you can see my event, simple event input, and U32, and it's going to be U32. Now, one other thing you might see, and we can open up another module, or sorry, another palette under simple crowdfund. Let's just look at how they did their events, okay? We're going to go into the source, we'll open up the library, and let me zoom in. And let's look up and down here to see where they declared their events. So here we go, declare events. And you can see they have a whole bunch of events declared here, and they pass different values to them. They're not all the same. And we can see here where they're also using the account ID. But why don't we copy and paste how it's declared here, just so we can go back to our generic event and paste it here below to see what a difference might be. Boop. Okay, and you can already see that this part of the code here, okay, is just like this statement here. But in this code, it has an extra variable declared here where it's just passing the value of this. So you actually can run it just like this. It's going to work just fine. Okay, so it will work either way. So I just wanted you to know that, so you know what's going on here when you see it declared in a slightly different way. That, you know, we could actually go in here and say, you know, account ID is equal to, and it's going to run like this. Okay. And here you can see the ID has caught up and said, okay, we're going to pass this into here instead of directly. Next, I want to go back and look quickly at the documentation here from the Substrate recipes. And we're going to go a little bit farther. Oops, wrong page. Let's go a little bit farther down here. Down, 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 down. So we covered all of this stuff. Yay. Okay, what we did not cover so far is this constructing the runtime. So as we talked before, when we very first started this series, we talked about different runtimes, and the runtime that we're using is called, I believe, the super runtime. And we need to tell the runtime about our different palettes that we're using and what they need, okay? So for example, here it's saying in the construct runtime macro, we need to have the name of our palettes here, and then we need to say what we're using within our palette. So we're using the module, we're using a call within it, and we're using an event. And for the simple event, we can tell it that we're just using type event, okay? But if we're using the generic event, we need to tell it that it's event and our little angly brackets with a T to say type, that this is going to use a generic. Okay, you don't need to use them both. Okay, if you're using generics and simple types, then you can just use the generic type here. Again, we also need to implement the event for our palette. So we need to say implement simple underscore event, that's the name of the palette. And then we're going to say configure for runtime. The type that we need to configure is event, and it's going to be called event. Okay, so let's just take a look at our runtime and see if we can find that. Now, from the very first video, or maybe the second video here, we did talk about what runtime we're using and how we could check that. So let's check runtimes. We're using this super runtime, and let's check the source. And I don't know if it will be, I don't think it'll be in the Genesis. It should be in the library here, I think. And it's easy enough for us to have a look. And so these are all the palettes that are being used. And you can see lots of errors here because it doesn't necessarily recognize the substrate formatting, and that's okay. So here is implement generic events, the name of the palette, config for the runtime. We need the type of event equals event. So you can see like a lot of these are all using events, so they all need to be declared one by one. There's no way to, mass declare these. So you need to go ahead and do that. And here's the simple event. So again, we said implement simple event palette, configuration for runtime, and then the type event equals event. And let's see here. Okay, so, and then we have constructing the runtime, and we're going to tell it all the types that it needs to use here. So we've got system, and we've got, everything here. Let's just find simple event. And you can see here that we need the module, we need a call, and we need an event. And the generic one is going to have of type T. So G, we're going to look up generic event, and we can see event of type T because it's generic type. So once you've added those in, then you'll be able to run this. So let's go ahead and run this. We're going to compile it, and hopefully no problems pop up. You never really know until you run your compiler, which is always a good thing. Then we're going to hop into Polkadot.js and run this using the generic event function and see how that goes. Okay, now that that's compiled, let's go ahead and go back to polkadotjs.org. Make sure you refresh this, otherwise you might actually have some problems. And you might get some kind of error because it's checking a block that really doesn't exist. So I'm going to go over to developer extrinsics because we're going to call a function on the chain. And let's just change to Bob for some sort of a difference. And I'm going to check for generic event as the name of my palette. And here it is. And we can call a simple event and a generic event as we built into this. And it's still only asking for one value. So again, let's just do 1, 2, 3. Submit our transaction, confirm this. And it says it's successful. So why don't we do the simple event while we're here just to confirm that it works. We'll just do 1, 1, 1. Submit and sign that. And now we can go ahead and look at the Explorer. And it says we've had 2 recent events. So let's look at this generic one first. And you can see it pass back not just our U32 value that we passed in, which was 1, 2, 3, but it also passed back the account ID. And this is a special type, which includes the name. And we also have the address here. So this is really cool that we're able to pass back more complicated information than just a simple type. So a primitive type. And we've got our simple here, and it just passed back 1, 1, 1. So there you have it. Hopefully that makes things a little more straightforward for you when implementing events in Substrate. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them below. And hopefully I'll be able to help you if I know the answer, or maybe we can give you some more resources to find out on your own.